Hello and welcome back from the networking break. This is Tom Bechtold, of course, your host for today's virtual conference. Up next, we are going to be talking about how to manage AI risk to let innovation prosper. So, a little bit of a different topic for us today, and I'm happy to announce that. We have one of my dear friends presenting today. You've probably seen her on the Ask a Lawyer bit that we have for the last 3-4 quarters that we've been doing here at SecureWorld Digital. Violet Sullivan, she is an adjunct professor at Baylor School of Law, AVP Cyber Solutions Team Leader at Crum and Forster Insurance Agency, not necessarily a legal outfit, but she definitely has a hat that has legal on it. So I'll introduce Violet. If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of a backstory for you for the folks that maybe don't know or haven't seen us do the Ask a Lawyer thing yet. But welcome. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'll give I feel like a broken record with the backstory thing, but I'll kind of give my interest in AI story and
Cool.
coming at this saying, I think I've been always curious about doing something differently, whether it's more efficiently, whether it's more personal. I think that there's a lot of routine things that we interact with day to day, especially in the technical world. I'm as a lawyer that decided I don't want to go the traditional legal route and I want to go more technical. I've seen that a lot of the internal business, they don't make decisions in a way that sometimes is collaborative with all departments and what is the easiest thing. And so when I started working and messing around with generative AI and learning more about it, I was like a sponge, trying to bring in everything, but also trying to poke holes and figure out where the risks were. So my background in this is not only participating internal on our own AI group, but also speaking about it worldwide. And I got the amazing opportunity early in the process when no one knew what this was going to be to speak at in UK for Lloyd's of London and be in the room where we were starting to talk as a industry how insurance would be able to see the risk change the way that they price products.
Interesting. Nice. That's a nice little sneak peek for you, I would imagine, then, for the being at Lloyd's. So that's cool.
It was the group was that we were with was the Professional Liability Underwriters Society. I think that's the right plus. And I loved it because I felt like there was no way to go wrong because they hadn't. I had a question at the beginning, like who's played with it. Apparently, the way that I phrased it sounded a little inappropriate, but so it couldn't have started on a more like vulnerable state of saying like
Right.
I was encouraging them to play with this tool, and it didn't come off correctly. They do at the end though, we were all able to kind of start debating how to work with it because I was able to successfully kind of bring them back from being absolutely scared from ever touching it.
Right. Right. Excellent. Well, hey, let's get into some of the questions that I have for you because I want to find out, what's going on here as we're talking about these different risks. So, if you wouldn't mind, actually, I know we're identifying risks, but before we started our session, we talked a little bit about there's 4 different kinds of risks that you've identified associated around AI. So, if you wouldn't mind, kind of unpack those for us to start off.
I'm going to throw a 5th one in too. The whole
Okay.
focus of today is to say we don't, as lawyers, regulatory groups, whatever groups are creating the rules and making and pointing out the issues, we don't want this innovation to stop. We don't want the internet to stop growing. Like, well, maybe now at this point we're good, but we don't want to stop generative AI from evolving and doing so. We want to put guardrails up. We want to do so safely. Everyone's heard that spiel. So I want to get actually to the meat of this saying, I think that, and I'm going to add a 5th category for you. I think that the categories of risk are there's 5 different categories. We're going to start on really the first 4 saying there's going to be technical risks. You know that this audience is well aware that there's technical risks like the data breach issues, privacy issues, algorithmic bias. We'll touch on that, but I think more so really getting a grasp on legal and regulatory risks. Those 2, we have seen more in the news. And I want to point out some examples too of actual lawsuits and issues that could be facing your organization if this was something that, and we've seen the generative AI develop. If something, you built it for one thing, but because of the large language model parameters, it actually morphed into something else, or it did something unexpected. Because I think before I get to the last one, well, actually, it's a perfect segue to the cultural risk. I think there is an ethics and cultural side of this that we need to address, because I would assume no one expected some of the bad effects that came from this. And there's someone early on that told me in a speaking session, said, it's like a mirror. AI is like a mirror. It's going to show you the good in society with art, creativity, innovation, but it's also going to show you the bad in society, because it's taking that the previous knowledge base and replicating learning in that way. So it might go forward in one direction, but it's going to need some tweaks to make sure it learns from the past mistakes instead of repeating the past mistakes. And then 5, I'll save, because I don't want to get to the bad news first.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So I'm trying to figure out what the 5th one would be then. Okay, interesting. Okay, let's go. So let's understand some of these, right? How are you viewing this in these different categories, though? So like technical, we talked about the software, and data privacy breaches, but what more is there to be concerned with there?
So I think this is the example that I give. It kind of leads into the after effect of having that cultural risk. But from a base level, the algorithmic bias that happens because of repeated similarities and trends of the knowledge, the inputs, it creates that technical risk of pointing back to the technology that made it. It's kind of like the question, there's still going to be this question of, and I don't think it's properly resolved, of who killed the person, the gun or the human. It's going to be the same issue with AI. This is a tool, and we're using this tool, but then the tool went off. And the example I give is Twitter had the issue with the algorithm showing a bias against people with darker skin. Apple's credit card algorithm had the issue of unfairly excluding women from those that were financially capable. So it's taking that past data. Yes, there may have been more males input into a normal financial model, but to make sure that that's not influencing the output I try to bring the technical risk to the forefront, because just because it does this doesn't mean we can blame. It means the fingers are going to point back at the technical team that created it. Right. So it's about, I guess I really want to highlight that even if you did not intend it, this is something you should test for. You should think about the worst case scenario. You should build it around the worst case scenario. And it reminds me a lot of privacy by design, security by design as a concept. Is we are going to have to think about trends in the data that may mess up the output, right, and be able to correct based on that, or put it into a longer testing process, having a longer beta process to figure out where the problems are. I feel like, and the example that I'll give is the hacking of the generative AI, where people will try to get it to spit out how it was made and the source, right, code and all of those things. There's a name for that. Reverse hacking the generative
reverse
AI.
Engineering.
Okay,
it's just reverse engineering.
But I feel like there's another, anyway. That kind of reverse engineering is already shown to be something that we as the security and technical community love to poke holes in this. So I would just say encourage your own peers, and almost like how doctors and academic papers have that peer review process where we're able to poke holes in each other's work. I think AI really needs to have that kind of camaraderie, saying we want to make it better. We want this to be innovative, but we really have to figure out how it hurts people or the bottom line. Because in the technical scenario, you could be held accountable from a legal and regulatory perspective. So those are the next two I'm going to get to. But do you have any questions, or you want me to just keep going?
I do, but I feel like the ones I have are more tied, based off what you were just talking about. It's more tied toward the cultural stuff. So I'm going to wait till we get there, if you don't mind.
Okay. So legal for once. So I'm separating legal and regulatory just to make everything clear from a technical perspective. The legal I really see as your contractual liability. So if you have contracts with other vendors and resources and even clients, you're going to have things you agreed to on paper that you have to comply with. So there's going to be things like confidentiality clauses and indemnification and limitation of liability. These things are going to be viewed a little bit differently because you're using this now in a new concept. You're going to be, if you're using AI or creating AI or bringing it into the process, you're going to have to view those relationships in those contexts in a new light and think about it through a new lens. But the easiest way to say this, especially from the legal perspective, is it's not necessarily going to be a brand new area of law. It's going to take from intellectual property. It's going to take from copyright. There's going to be certain standards from a legal perspective. It's just not necessarily easily Googleable right now because we're still figuring it out. We're still figuring out how to keep accountable the right people. And I think we learn from cyber because right now, and I'll still have a lot of technical people say, why are we in the laws? Why are we putting all the onus on the victim? The victim company corporation gets breached. Why do we make them pay out the nose for keeping that data safe and making sure? And I was like, well, what's the alternative? Someone has to be accountable, and we can't get everyone put in jail every time something gets hacked. It's not that simple. So law enforcement has a role, right? And that side, the only way to make certain people whole is to financially hold accountable the people that should be protecting the data. So to me, that's the legal risk isn't a hurdle that's going to be huge to jump over, but I do think it needs to be considered with contracts and then also with potential lawsuits. So the future liability of and this is where it's going to get complicated, how can people take this and do so in order to inflict harm? So every lawsuit, the whole focus is how did we cause harm? Without harm, you're not going to have that standing. So you need to show how you can cause that harm, unless it's a statutory. So we can get to that too. There's a statutory laws that you would have to answer to. But if it causes harm, there's a lot of ways that we can do that. In fact, one of my favorite ways was in the UK example I just gave. I said, what's your most common type of claim? And it was a professional liability underwriter. And they said, well, it's just missed deadlines. It's like, that's the biggest claim that they had. I would have never have guessed that, right? I would have thought it was like something more egregious that, they have lawsuits going over. To me, remembering that missed deadlines as a potential harm, think about how much having a computer calibrate things and kind of move them forward across different finish lines that used to be human QA. I'm not saying there's not going to be a human QA at the end, but I do think there's the potential of some of these smaller mistakes to increase that liability. Now, the other alternative, the same person said, well, couldn't it also the other way, make it so that there's less mistakes because less humans to muck it up. I still think there is still the question that you need to go through as an organization and say, how do we currently, what are the mistakes we make currently? What are our worst case scenarios? Now let's play those worst case scenarios through with the lens of having this new technology. Does it make the risk better or worse? Sometimes you won't know. Like with the deadline one, I really don't know. I feel like the deadline issue is something that really does have a potential to get corrected, but there could be some crazy case scenarios where, we have a Y2K moment where the zeros out and then the computer just goes haywire, but then you'd have to have, humans realize or not realize that there's an issue. Another legal that I haven't, so contractual, the legal liability for harm, but also statutory. There's some rules on the books that just say you don't even have to have harm. If you disobey this rule, then you are out X amount. That is the issue for harm. And that statutory liability is one of those things that CCPA is famous for, because they say, I don't care what harm. I think because it's so hard to prove harm in a data breach case, is that I don't care what harm it is. If you expose this data, it's this much per individual. And that's how we're going to measure it. And that's why everyone was so up in arms when it came to the US, because it's not a matter of proving that you got hurt. It's a matter of penalizing those that lost the data, which, again, penalizing the victim, but it's got to go somewhere. So
let me ask you this, though. I mean, you're talking about a victim. It could be Facebook, right? That could be your victim, right? So I don't think they're a victim.
No,
I feel like they owe me.
I was just thinking that
frankly,
from the side of the technologists, you don't see them as victims. The people that actually brought this up to me a couple of weeks ago was my students in the law program. In the LLM, they were litigators going, defense lawyers, there's a different mindset. There's some people that defend corporations all day, and then there's the people that defend the citizens all day. So of course you're going to have bias on whichever one. I just realizing that there's some organizations that get breached, not all, some organizations that get breached that have incredible security policies, that have really good structure inside, zero trust, all this stuff. And there's a small slip up or a human error slip up where someone was socially engineered and it was not a foreseen situation. I've seen a lot of breaches being on the forensic side. So I think it's just, I want to give credit back to, it's not just those that really suck at protecting the data that get breached.
Well, you have, as a Facebook or a Google or whoever, right, of that magnitude, you've got a big old target on your back because you've got the lion's share of everyone's data. So of course everybody's getting in line to try to get your stuff. So that makes sense. But how does the AI play into that?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, how does the AI either protect you from that or make it a problem?
Makes it a problem. One of the first things that I just thought of when you said that is and I remember even recording a session where I said, data is gold. And it was like 2014. And I was like, data is gold. Well, now we say data is toxic waste. Like, just be very careful how you handle it and how you move it to the right place and make sure you secure it correctly and put the appropriate controls around it. So I think the way AI comes in and changes this is we collected all this data back when it was give me, more, give me all the data. When we collected it, we had no clue that this is what it could be used for. Yet, I would venture to say most companies would still view that data as our data. Even if the consent was not asked specifically for AI, I think the issue is going to be that the inputs that the data originally came into a company's possession were not intended to be used for AI. And I just thought of this theory right here. So anyone who uses it, please send me a check. The idea 10%
finder's fee is standard, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but just send me something. I need that mailbox money.
There you go.
The idea, though, is going to happen. Privacy lawsuits are increasing. The plaintiffs' attorneys are getting smarter about how to show harm. I think it'd be very easy for a plaintiff's firm to look at how the data is used within the AI model versus how the data originally was collected. So even if a company, say law firm A says, we have so many briefs and templates and materials of legal defenses, but all those briefs and memos and materials, they all have client-specific data on them. Well, they can be used for defending. That's usually what client data is taken for, is I'm taking this information so I can understand how to defend you better, or how to come up with a legal theory or a defense. The issue, though, is if you start using that and you're doing it to train other things and you're showing like, oh, we're going to make templates, we're going to make money off of this, we're going to put it, like if there's going to be this ripple effect that you start using this data for, it's no longer used as intended. I mean, you could argue attorney-client privilege on a lot of that, but then you could argue, how is it privileged if you fed it to your generative AI tool? So there's a lot you can get into. I feel like the ripple effect is real. I was going to get into regulatory, but did you ask about the technical again?
No, actually, I had a question. Well, sort of. I mean, it kind of plays into technical, but also the legality of this. But now we talked a little bit the other day about there was some group that's facing several lawsuits because they were scraping faces off of the internet and using them without consent. So would you talk about that a little bit? Because I have to believe that this is happening all over the place because the generative AI, I mean, look at the images here. The guy over her shoulder on our slide, I never noticed that when I downloaded the picture originally. I was like, because when I just obviously an AI generated image, I just said, give me a lawyer in court and show me like legal jargon or something like that. And you got this like weird guy in the back that's just kind of like doesn't really match up. So it's like, let's talk. Who was that group, if you can tell us, and what did they do wrong? Obviously, just grabbing images, but.
Well, it's interesting because this was actually filed. This is actually something, this brings into the whole, I know someone's going to say this on this going, it's been around forever. Why are we just now talking about the risks, right? This lawsuit, it was Clearview AI. And the lawsuit was filed against them in 2020. So before we started this craze, there were already people, what I would say, holding accountable the risks and outcomes of the those using AI in the practice. So Clearview AI was a surveillance company that had captured, I think it was over like 10 billion face prints. I think always of the TSA, and how many times I want to say, no, I don't want you to take my face, but then I don't have extra 10 minutes to spend in the TSA line. So I give them over my whole face print, which apparently they delete right away. The issue here, though, was that the violation was actually using, going back to the statutory issue, it actually used the Illinois Biometric Privacy Act to say, this is unlawful, not just because you didn't ask consent, which is another theory, like we could take it that way, but because it's literally illegal per the biometric privacy for any Illinois residents for you to take their biometric data without consent. So just like and I don't know if anyone remembers forgetting the name of the case, but there was the case of the trucking employees that had to do fingerprints, and every fingerprint was something that they didn't ask consent for. And so the jury found a huge amount against the company because it wasn't taken to consideration when asked the consent of the biometric data. So I think the case you were thinking of the issue was Clearview AI, but I think that there's been an even more recent holding accountable for images when it comes to, and there's the cultural thing when it comes to public perception, or that the ethical consideration of like and the example that I bring up is, was it, I don't want to say the wrong thing. It was Walgreens or CVS or one of them. Hold on.
A big pharmacy chain.
Yeah, big pharmacy chain. Good, that's perfect. Big pharmacy chain was held accountable by the FTC in the last couple of years because their surveillance cameras were in unfairly, with a bias, marking certain people as more likely to steal based on history, which is horrible to sit there and take that background of those caught stealing were targeted more, but those caught stealing were, based on human biases. And so this human bias ripple effect showed as racism. Same with, there was there was an image output. I don't remember which one this one was, but there's an image output that when it asked for a certain type of person, the people that you would think as good, like good standing citizens, like policemen and community leaders and professional doctors, they would all be white. And the people that you would consider as being some kind of other type of job that wasn't as prestigious would be a different color. For example, you'd ask it for a hotel maid, and then it would say a specific race for things that were of service industry and not a leader. I think it goes back to that horrible mirror. Is like the reason it's capturing is because the data is skewed. The data is skewed because the human bias exists, but we need to correct it. This is like a perfect opportunity to sit there and say, okay, you may have this intake, but we want to limit this intake to making sure that this doesn't play into it and somehow tweak the inputs so that the outputs have a more fair result. And I think it's also, I think we're also going to have to be very careful about our consent forms and as we sign them as consumers, because what I see is people are broadening them so far that it's like, okay, when they have bugs inside of our brains, we will have already given over all consent and won't have ability to take it back. So I think thinking about this both is important to think about it both from the company side, the technologist side. You're working for the company. What ethical considerations do you have? Because you know how the things work on the inside, but also your own consumption and your consumer rights and status. That to me is going to be really important. Have you seen the Amazon? They were in New York. They've since discontinued this idea, but they had videos on every part of the grocery store, like the Amazon Fresh grocery stores they had. And it's like a scary image. I wish I had it actually pulled up here, but it's like cameras everywhere. It looks like 1984. It's totally weird. But the whole thing was you just grab it. And there's some stores like this in certain airports. I think, whatever.
Because you don't have to actually get in line and buy it. It just charges
you just go in and buy it, right? But the issue,
we have that here, I think.
Where is here?
Oh, sorry, Portland. Oregon, not
I forgot
Maine.
for a second. And then people are now going to call you because you said dear friend, and I was like, I don't know where you live. This is why it's fun to do this with SecureWorld, right? So anyway, I don't even know why I brought up all the video cameras and surveillance, but I think it's important to look at it both from you as the consumer and also you as the technical producer.
Right. Let's shift gears because we've spent a lot of time on kind of unpacking what these risks are. Let's take a look at how people can either
oh wait, you didn't hear my fifth risk.
Oh yeah, let's talk about your fifth one.
This is my fifth risk. I was saying I didn't want to turn anyone off in the beginning. The fifth risk is the existential risk. This is the risk that Stephen Hawking warned about, that Elon Musk warned about. Just going to throw it out there because I have heard of a case and it was retracted. So there was this, every time a story is retracted by the press, you think like, who didn't do their job, right? Like you think you have some idea of, was this real? Was it corrected because it was not real, or was it corrected because it touched on too many toes? So there was a story 2 or so years ago that was from the military. Drone operator told drone complete this mission. It said the parameters were don't actually kill the end victim or end target. Don't actually kill the end target, but do everything you can to make sure that you capture it. Was the prompt. If you went back to the statement that they said, forget about that statement. We weren't really doing that. And keep in mind, this is the example of the drone that I'm going to give you. It's totally conspiracy. This is like tinfoil hat stuff for me. So I'm not going to totally go behind this theory, but I do think it helps to give an example of existential risk is that so this example was all simulated. It wasn't real. The worst case scenario is that it was real. but the drone operator said, don't kill the target, but it said to accomplish the mission, do anything you have to do, it killed the drone operator. So the unforeseen in the simulation, not killed it, but it was this unforeseen, we told it not to harm this, but it had that workings in his mind that the only way to accomplish the mission was to kill the drone operator because of the way it was set, everything was set up. So
that's who gave you the mission. So to finish the mission, you would, that's weird logic,
and
but it
so
kind
the
of fits.
unpredictability I mean, that to me is, I'm going to say, I mean, the thing that went through, I think, a lot of people's minds when we started talking about the world ending or everyone's job get replaced, was thinking still just about that red nuclear button. Like that to me is the existential risk, is that there is and still exists power in certain hands that could do big damage. So I'll leave it at that. Just that it's very unpredictable still. I think everyone in this industry will still say, in any AI capacity, there's still a lot of unknown.
Oh, for sure.
So I'll stop with the existential stuff now. Bring me back to reality,
I
Tom.
think that's a good one, because you had one recently. It was an airline. I don't know which airline it was, but like somebody was like changing their flight, and they were supposed to get like all these fees or whatever.
Yeah, the customer
Ultimately
service
got it
example.
for free. Yeah. So I mean, it's like somehow. I mean, now granted, I think they massaged that as they were trying to talk to the bot, and made that outcome possible somehow. Who knows how, but they've since fixed that, I'm sure. So talking to, like, using that as like
it's called poisoning. You said it was called reverse engineering. It's called AI poisoning.
Oh, right. Yep.
I thought of the word. Okay.
That's so 15 minutes ago. Let's talk about identifying and prioritizing some of these risks, though. Where should people get started looking? I mean, the poisoning one is probably a big one right there, just to make sure that the data itself is. I mean, because it's like people looking at their endpoint security. To me, it's like you have to figure out, if you're not monitoring this stuff, you don't know where the threats are, right? So how do we get to prioritize these risks so that we can, as a business, prosper? Going back to your original premise.
So I would say what you're describing is more of an output risk to monitor, right? Like endpoints. I think before it even goes live to a big group, we have to go back to the inputs. So the first priority has to be how you build it. What are the inputs of data? Look, perfect picture for this. Pages and pages of data that you're able to put in. And I think there was a Mad Men episode. This is going off the rails now, Tom. There was a Mad Men episode where they bring in this huge computer and it took up the whole room, and it simulated what happened when computers started coming in the 70s. And there was a salesman there from, I think it was like really representing IBM. And there was a salesman there that said, this computer is going to be able to measure or count, what is it, something to the moon. And the response Don Draper has was like, why would any human sit there and count that many feet to the moon? Like, why do we need to know this crap?
Right.
And I love that call out anyway, because we're still going to need to decide if less is more, because this is putting so much output out there. In fact, I can't read certain articles on LinkedIn because it's just GPT. So I think the first priority is inputs. And what are we training the data on? Do we have proper consent? And have we thought through the ways that this might be harmful? Then there's a test, right? There has to be some kind of testing and QA internally so that the bad stuff doesn't get out yet. And you work it through your internal teams and work it through other departments, maybe that aren't as technically savvy. You have to, and I'm actually having my team play with our internal tool right now because I want to see the kinks. And I feel like they might see this as a waste of time. Like, why is she wanting us to like record meetings and see if it summarizes it and get it to, distill down these things? And I'm like, because I want to see the use cases and I want to see the proposal for the use case. So then there's like that testing and trial period. And then finally, I think it's learning from your mistakes and that risk assessment that you have to do throughout the process. It's that continual evolution of readdressing the risks, because humans are going to figure more and more out about the tools that they use, and they're going to use it for nefarious things, just like we had the internet and all of a sudden we have a porn industry that's blossoming and blooming and taking over. And then that in turn leads to a lot of other unwanted human trafficking and sex trafficking. So we have to get to that point where we're continuously improving and holding accountable the people that have the opportunity to make changes. And I think at the base level, that is the technical community, because we call each other out with hacking. We call each other out on Twitter for, your stuff's too weak. I was able to break in, like, clean up your stuff. It's a great community of continuous learners, anyone in the technical side. And I think we need to do the same with AI, calling out the bullshit when we see it and making sure that we're moving in the right direction and taking into account, this is where take into account the money risk, because I think a lot of people don't think about what happens when I have a lawsuit against me. What happens, it still takes money to defend. So even if you say the claims against you are false, you still have to pay money to a lawyer to go defend your point. So I think just taking into consideration the other points of view and these other risks that I'm bringing up.
Stop collecting data on stuff that you don't even have a use for it. I mean, just because you can get people to fill out a form doesn't mean you need to have 20 questions on the stupid thing.
That's easy to say, but also, like, you can't get me to stop signing up for rewards programs. Like, I do it if it's, yoga down the street, I'll sign up for your rewards program. So it's easier said than done. But on that same
token, though, you're talking about not letting people put in stuff on the networks and stuff. So now you're going to invite shadow IT instead. So which do you want?
Oh, that's a good point. We need to have an offshoot on shadow IT. So tell me more about that, Tom.
Well, I mean, it's it's always been around. I mean, I used to do it all the time when I had another job. When I was in the copier business, I would mess with people's computers. I would install stuff if I wanted to. I mean, I was a nightmare. I was like the what you don't do for security awareness training. I was that guy roaming around.
Did you do the thing where if someone left their screen open, you put like a bad picture in the back or an embarrassing picture in the back?
There are no comments made on that. No, I never did any pictures like that, but I would like lock their computers or change the password on it because it was like super easy to do.
That's even worse. That causes like churn, Tom. Okay.
But I would also tape the receiver on their phone too. So for the salespeople.
Someone did to me, actually, I'll name him Alan Burson, who is still in the cyber industry with me. He rearranged my keycaps, and to say Violet, or like my name, it said my name across the keys. And I was like, how the hell did you do this?
A lot of time on your hands, I guess.
Uh-huh.
That's funny. Okay, let's go back to, I got a lot of questions here for you still. What kind of, let's go to technical. What kind of technical controls should people look at as they dig into this stuff? I mean, what are you thinking about?
Logs. The first thing that comes to mind is documentation of, who logged in, who used it, who made tweaks, version history, things that you already use for sensitive, confidential information. You should use for, I would take the playbook of security and privacy by design and all of the efforts that have been, because there's been doctoral, things written on privacy by design, security by design. Learn from our peers that have said, hey, this is way better if you think about the risks before you create things, so that we don't just think about money, because that has not worked out well. So if we go straight to ROI, we're skipping over ways that we can actually eventually get closed down or lose money because we're not building it into the way something works. So you're ultimately it might take more time for the product to be out in the market or available for your internal team to use, but it's worth making sure that you are keeping track of the edits, the changes, the tweaks. And I think access controls and even any PAM tool that you have, I think that would all be really good to make sure that it's a part of the guardrails that you set around what you're building and what you're interacting with. I think training as well. Like, I'm a privacy attorney, so I know when I'm sitting there and putting something into generative AI, I take out any names. I put the person does this, and then they encounter this problem. What's the solution? I don't put the real name in, right? So I make immediate edits when I'm thinking through something. I might put even the problem in a more vague way, right? Instead of saying like, Outlook is busted, so what do I, what do I do, blah, blah, blah. It's going to know, I assume already that the generative AI is going to know my IP address. It's going to know where I'm sitting. It's going to know how long I'm sitting on this. It's going to know all of these things. So I want to prevent it from tying that data too much back to a situation or time that would be, that would come back to haunt me. So I already put in something like a non-normal person. I put in something like I'm gonna get sued for it later, right? Everything you put in writing, you want to think that way. Well, now I think there needs to be more training on inputs and outputs. Very generic training to say this thing is just like search history. Don't type I want to learn how to make a bomb into the search box, just the same as you wouldn't put that into a generative AI prompt. Understanding that, I think, is not as obvious as we think it is from a technical perspective.
Right, right. So switching gears from that to more like the people, our cultural stuff, right? Which is hence this picture. So what about like boards and the people that you need to get buy-in from so that you can actually utilize this stuff? So again, so that we're trying to make the business more profitable. And either that's through, getting people to streamline their processes using AI or things like that. But where do you find pushback from the humans that you can actually affect?
Oh, I think that there's disinformation about the hiccups and I don't mean to be a know-it-all when people say, hallucinations, but there is a more correct term. It's confabulations, because hallucinations implies that the person that there is an actual opinionated person spitting out something that's different and changing it. It implies that ability of reason that is beyond just the computer's ability. So it's almost going to that existential threat thing. I digress. I think that there is a lot of, especially the example I'll give is law firm world. They are stuck. They are absolutely stuck on that one case from New York where the one attorney put in a case that wasn't real. They cite that on every AI webinar, and here I am doing it now. They cite it everywhere, and everyone's like, or I want to say, we've heard this case before. Show us how it's being used in a good way. And I think getting past the disinformation of saying it's problematic, because that's what's clickbait, right? We need to give use cases. I would really love to see more and more Harvard Business Review articles. There's a great one that talks about general purpose technologies and kind of equates this to a steam engine and internal combustion, whatever it is, whatever the engines are, and just how it changed not only the way we move logically, but also the way we can grow food and send it somewhere else, and the way we can travel and the cultural impact. You have to show a use case for boards to get any of that. Otherwise, they're stuck on the one thing they read in headline form. Because even if they read the headlines, I would venture to say a lot of the board members might not be able to consume the body of that to pick out what's good and what's bad. Whereas we can see beyond the headlines from a technical perspective. From a legal perspective, we can see beyond the headlines. But this AI risk thing, there's not a lot of people that can see beyond the clickbait headline. And so that's what sticks in our brain. We got to get beyond that. I think too, there's going to be a lot of AI tabletops and figuring out like, okay, so what do we do here? And showing the risks as well as showing the benefits. I'd be interested to know how the actuaries view this. Like, how are people quantifying this? I mean, I'm sure my company does, but
one would hope. Interesting.
Can we
interesting.
zip that one? No. No one will listen to this long. No one will stay with us for 45 minutes.
Are you kidding me? They're sitting on the edge of their seats. They only had to buy. They bought a ticket, but they only needed half of it, right? Because I don't even know how that one goes
We'll
anymore.
see. It's like that one we did with David and uh, where
Sam.
we left the goose egg. Sam, that's right. David and Sam,
Yeah,
where we left the goose egg at the end, which we need to do another insurance one, by the way.
we do need to do that. Let's see. As we're wrapping up, what do you think people should first thing that they should do, or what's just some advice in general from our chat today? What should they be looking at? Because I was thinking actually when you were just talking and looking at this picture, I was like, another existential one to think about, or even just culturally, is who we're hearing say this stuff too, right? So like you might not like Elon Musk, but he has a heck of a lot to say about AI, of course, right? For obvious reasons. But if you don't like the guy, you're going to be like, yeah, we ain't
Tune him
using
out,
that.
right? You're not going to take
Right,
his. Well, Steve Wozniak was also one of the ones that spoke out against,
right.
which Apple. If we there's also the cynical point of view, right? Whether or not you like them or don't like them, there was a letter written to OpenAI early on in spring of this year. No, I don't know. I'm losing track of how long AI has been around.
Right.
But
I think it was
spring
last
after
year.
the
I think.
November,
Uh-huh.
it was November last year, right? 23?
Yeah, I think I know which one
Okay.
letter you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, they wrote an open letter that says, "Hey, can you pause everything for like 3
Right.
months? Can you
Yeah.
let us like
Exactly.
examine and put guardrails?" And I don't know,
And all
remember
the
the actual
criminals were like,
time.
"Yeah, we're totally gonna wait. We'll take 6 months off. Let you guys catch up."
And the idea, right, is every other company is like, you just fell behind and you want to catch up to us. So this financially would benefit you from stalling for 3 months so that you can do R&D. But now we can't deliver to the consumer. It's almost like not letting that new version of the computer out to go to market because you want your other things to catch up, your other technology to catch up.
Right. Right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. If you wouldn't mind, finish typing out some of the answers to the questions that we have in the queue down there in the typed out bit. Out there in the audience, thank you for sticking out with us here in our little chat. Hopefully you guys got something good out of this. Throw something in the chat for us. If you like these kinds of conversations, I like just having just a chat about the topic. So for me, I always like just chatting with the presenters. But let us know what you think. Give us some feedback there. But this concludes our time with Violet Sullivan. How to manage AI risk to let innovation prosper. Hopefully we gave you some good food for thought with those different risks, especially the fifth one, the existential one, if I could actually say it right. But thank you all for joining us. Up next, we've got a networking break and then more sessions on the way. So more stuff for you guys to pick from. If you're having trouble making choices today, just remember, we're recording all of this stuff. It's going to be available on demand for the next 90 days. So you can always come back and check out the sessions that you missed or share these with colleagues. So please do that, and we will see everybody at the next round of sessions. Take care.